Hi, I'm Pia. I'm from the University of Twente.
Hi, I'm Manuela. I'm from Universidad Paula de la Vide.
My name is Julian. I'm from the Saarland University, Erasmus student currently at the UFO. And in the following, we are going to present to you Black Feminism by Ida B. Wells, Cooper, and Du Bois. We are going to start off with the historical context. In 1863, the Emancipation Declaration by President Lincoln was implemented, but very often times slavery was still practiced, especially in the South, which will be the main focus of our presentation. African Americans still had fewer rights by comparison to the whites, and the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which basically stated that people, regardless of their skin color, could be in any public space, was also ruled unconstitutional later, and it allowed southern states essentially the practice of racial segregation, which is an important event for Ida B. Wells, which we'll be looking at later on.
Today I'm going to talk about Angelia Haywood Cooper. She was born on August 10th in 1858 in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she died on February 27 in 1964 at the age of 105 years old. She is known as the mother of Black feminism, and she was an educator, a speaker, and one of the most influential female Black liberation activists. In 1892, she wrote A Voice from the South by a Black woman of the South. Angelia Cooper was born enslaved. She and her mother were held in bondage by George Washington Haywood, one of the sons of North Carolina longer-serving state transcourer John Haywood. She became literate at the age of 7, one of the few girls to be admitted to St. Augustine School. From a very young age, she stood out for intelligence, and that led to her being awarded many scholarships to study. She married her teacher, George A.C. Cooper, but the marriage only lasted 2 years since he passed away. When she finished her studies, she remained at the institution as an instructor. Cooper entered Oberlin College in Ohio after her husband's death. If this had not happened, she would have been required to be a housewife. After she graduated, Cooper taught mathematics and science in the Washington Color High School. 1892 was a really important year for Cooper because she published her great work of social analysis, A Voice from the South. She defended that educated African American women were necessary for uplifting the entire Black race. Cooper began lecturing across the country. She spoke about education, civil rights, and the status of Black women. In 1992, she became controversial since the white Washington, D.C. school disagreed with her educational approach for Black students. As a result of this, she left the school. In 1925, at the age of 67, she received a doctorate. She became the first African American woman in the USA to earn a PhD. Cooper contributed to Sociology a fresh new perspective on issues such as power, dominance, conflict, material resources, race, class, and gender. It is the concern with the intersection of race, class, and gender that makes Cooper's theory revolutionary. The equilibrium for Cooper's is another theoretical contribution. She defined this concept as an alternative to domination, and she involved a vision of society wherein all members of society coexist. Cooper's social theory is centered on a pursuit of justice. Unlike Marx, she thinks that class isn't a problem by itself. It is the combination of factors such as race, gender, class, color, and geopolitical locations that cause inequality. For Angelia Cooper, education was really important, and she will always remember as an advocate for education for Black women.
Now, moving on to Ida B. Wells Barnett. Her father worked after being freed as a carpenter for his former slave owner. They lived together with the white builder until her father set up his very own shop. She credits her parents for her interest in politics and also a clear sense of justice. She was the oldest of 5 siblings, and at that time there was great need for literate people in the South. Uh, she would later on, after her parents' death, also look after her 5 siblings. Um, she would then join a group of teachers, and they would share writings and discuss different topics from politics to socio-economic matters. Um, Later, she submitted uh, to the Black Baptist papers many journals. Now, as for a very important act, her very first act of resistance, this happened as a white conductor ordered her to sit in the smoker. The smoker was a very undesirable place to sit in a women's cart. The women's cart was a part of public transport in which only women would sit, but the smoker was a very, openly speaking, disgusting part of that. Wells Barnett herself described it as filthy and stifling. Because the Rights Act, as mentioned before, was ruled unconstitutional, now she, as a black woman, could be forced to sit in the smoker rather than where all of the other women would sit. This was, of course, an act of racial segregation and was sadly commonplace in the South at that time. This incident became, first off, very famous in the media, but also very famous in African American communities to this very day. Um, Another very important key event in her sociological career happened when 3 men, 3 black businessmen, one must add, were lynched. One of them was a friend of hers whom she held very dear. The 3 men were later on framed as conspirators by white newspapers, imprisoned, and brutally lynched. They conducted this was the start. This was the initial spark for Wells Barnett to conduct a black exodus from the city she lived in, which immediately also damaged white businesses. She was lucky to have done this because shortly after she was out of town, her offices were burned down. Um, a record. She used white newspapers statistics in her critique. So she utilized the white statistics for her own research, and one is to suspect that these white newspapers already did not give a true picture of the situation. But still, this was more than enough evidence for Wells Barnett to publish. She founded the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and especially later on fought for young black men harassed by the police, by white police force. As far as criticism is concerned, she can be criticized for her inability to work in coalitions, which is probably to be contributed to her very strong mindedness and to her very strong will of her own. Now, as for her sociology, her general sociology is determined through race relations, rather looking at sociology through the lens of race. It is also important for still today contemporary intercultural problems. Um, Sociology to her is a science of morality, and she herself holds on to a strong faith in the human being as a moral one, a human being that can better him or herself. She also is part of an enormous African American tradition of social analysis. The intersection of race, class, and gender adds many new dimensions to the feminist tradition of sociology, and her sociology is also strongly theoretical when it comes to the ways in which knowledge and public opinion are socially constructed. She has a very strong belief in a democratic legal process. and also very much believes in the power that media holds when it comes to forming the public opinion, which is for the time being a very advanced line of thought. Now, as for her sociology itself, we made out three main pillars. First off, functionalism. She has a strong rejection of Darwinist views. She also considers equilibrium a social good, which is only achieved through the contention between distinct cultures rather than assimilation. So she believes in difference rather than just assimilating and adjusting. She recognizes, as aforementioned, the role of mass media as a major player in social perception, but unlike most functionalists, she refuses the notion of objectivism. Her imperative theory consists of her believing in symbolic interaction and the power which symbolism in society has, and acts of symbolism especially. Now, regarding to the Marxist conflict theory, her final pillar of sociology, she acknowledges the importance of material resources, but at the same time, she does not limit her sociology to only class-related matters. To her, the interplay of many different factors like race, social standing, gender, and many other factors play an integral part in the oppression which she herself experienced a lot of. She does not believe in resolving social problems through the classless society as the goal of Marxism. To her, simply abolishing class would not solve the social problems of America of that time. And she is also challenged. She also wishes to challenge a society which finds equitable ways to manage conflict.
Now we come to our last and only male author, William Edward Booker Du Bois. He was born on February 23rd in 1868 in Massachusetts in the United States and died on August 27th in 1963 in Ghana in Africa. He was an American sociologist, historian, author, and activist, and he was also a co-founder of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as also E.W. Wells. Here we have a quote of Du Bois. He said, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, and then moved back again towards slavery." This shows his perception of the American society in his days, as he said that officially the slaves were freed, but technically they still suffered from severe discrimination and were not equal to the white people. To come to Du Bois' work, one of his most famous books is The Philadelphia Negro, which was published in 1896, and it's one of the first scientifically framed and conducted sociology studies ever, and therefore he systematically conducted interviews in black households in Philadelphia from 1896 to 1897, where he talked to over 2,500 people and combined this data with census data. This work shows the reality of racism and how racism impacts the lives and the opportunities of the black community in the United States. Another famous work of him is Black Reconstruction in America, which was published in 1935 and which illustrates how racism served the economical interests of the United States, and which also demonstrates the struggles of the newly liberated enslaved people who were not the same as the white people. So, according to Du Bois, he has a proposition how to solve what he calls race problem. He says he first believed that this can only be solved through knowledge and through social science, that when people know about racism and discrimination, that would lead to a change of mind and therefore reduce the problem. But later in his life, he became rather radical and was convinced that social change is only possible through protest. Now we look at Du Bois and his opinion on Black nationalism. He was one of the first advocates for Pan-Africanism, and which is the idea that all people with an African origin should unite because they follow the same interests and that therefore should fight together for their shared goals. He was the leader of the first Pan-African Congresses, which took place between 1919 and 1929, and he very much encouraged the development of Black literature and art. Furthermore, he wanted to develop a separate group economy of only Black producers and consumer cooperatives as a weapon for fighting economic discrimination. When we look at Du Bois and Black feminism, we have to see a very differentiated picture. On the one side, he advocated women's rights, and he researched a lot about the living conditions of Black women. We have to point out here that he did not only look at the living conditions of Black men and women together, but that he specifically looked at the living conditions of Black women because he noticed that they are different from Black men. In his personal life, nevertheless, he had kind of patriarchic ideas, and he saw Black women as mothers and workers and activists, but he didn't recognize them as intellectuals, and he never really valued the works, for example, of Cooper or B. Wells. Now we want to take a look on the Black feminist movement and show you a bit about the history of Black feminism.
The main ideas of Black feminism are several. The principal idea is that Black women are not only experiencing racism, sexism, or classism, but a combination of all. As a result of that, the situation and needs of Black women are distinct from those of Black men and white women. Many Black women did not feel represented in the campaigns of Black men, neither in the feminist movement of white women, since neither of these two included them in their struggles due to misogyny and racism.
When we look at the history of Black feminism, we can see that it already emerged in the early 1900s with the abolishment of slavery. Later, Black women, together with white women, fought for voting rights and protested against sexual and racial violence. And Black women were also very much involved in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. For example, the Montgomery bus boycott, which was led by Rosa Parks. In the 1960s and 70s, a discontent started with the civil rights movement and also the ideas of white feminism, because Black women did not feel welcomed and represented in the fight of Black men in the civil rights movement or in the fight of white women in the feminist movement. So that led to a separation of those groups, and till today, their Black feminism can be distincted from those. Since the 2000s until now, an even more intersectional approach is pursued by Black feminism, including ethnic minorities, and yeah. Now you can see our bibliography and our sources. And we hope you enjoyed our presentation and learned a bit about Black feminism.